October 15th, 1942. The morning fog clung to the railway yards of Warsaw like a shroud, muffling the sounds of locomotives and freight cars that would soon carry the lifeblood of the German Eastern Campaign. In a cramped office overlooking the marshalling yards, 23-year-old Margot Kellner adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and inserted a fresh sheet of carbon paper between two transportation manifests. The rhythmic clacking of her typewriter keys had become as familiar as her own heartbeat over the past 18 months. She believed, as did everyone around her, that precision and efficiency in these logistical documents would help maintain the momentum of German forces advancing deep into Soviet territory. What none of them could have imagined was that her seemingly innocent typing errors would soon redirect 50 fully loaded supply trains carrying over 3,000 tons of critical winter equipment to destinations that existed only in her imagination, leaving thousands of soldiers to face the brutal Russian winter with summer uniforms and empty stomachs. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable, true account of how a Polish typist's deliberately crafted mistakes became one of the most devastating acts of sabotage in the European conflict, proving that sometimes the mightiest war machines could be brought to their knees not by bombs or bullets, but by the quiet rebellion of a woman armed with nothing more than a typewriter and an intimate understanding of German bureaucracy. Margot had never intended to become a saboteur. Born in Krakow to a family of railway workers, she had learned to type at age 16 and spoke fluent German thanks to her grandmother's insistence on proper education. When the German administration took control of Polish railway operations in 1939, her linguistic skills and typing speed of 80 words per minute made her invaluable to the transportation logistics department. She processed hundreds of shipping manifests each week, each document representing tons of ammunition, food, medical supplies, and equipment flowing eastward to support nearly 2 million German soldiers spread across a front stretching from Leningrad to Stalingrad. The work was mind-numbing but critically important. Every manifest contained dozens of specific details: train identification numbers, departure times, intermediate stops, final destinations, cargo descriptions, and weight distributions. A single transcription error could delay a shipment by days or send it to the wrong location entirely. The German supervisors, particularly Oberfuhrer Klaus Brenner, had made it clear that accuracy was paramount. Any typist whose error rate exceeded 2% would face immediate reassignment to manual labor details. Brenner was a methodical man in his early 50s who had spent 20 years in railway administration before the conflict began. He conducted daily inspections of the typing pool, examining carbon copies with the intensity of a watchmaker examining gears. He prided himself on running the most efficient transportation hub in the occupied territories, processing over 200 shipments weekly with an error rate of less than 1%. His office walls displayed charts tracking delivery times, cargo weights, and routing efficiency, all annotated in his precise handwriting. For nearly 2 years, Margot had maintained a spotless record. She arrived at 7:30 each morning, typed steadily until 6 in the evening, and never questioned the contents of the manifests she processed. But everything changed on a grey Tuesday in October, when she accidentally opened a manila folder marked Restricted Personnel Transport. The documents inside detailed the movement of civilian populations from occupied territories to work camps deeper in German-controlled regions. The clinical language could not disguise the human tragedy described in those pages. Families separated, children relocated without their parents, elderly people deemed unsuitable for productive labor and marked for alternative processing. The manifest she had been typing described winter clothing and food supplies, but these new documents revealed that many of the eastbound trains she had been processing carried human cargo destined for places that offered no return journey. That evening, Margot sat in her small apartment above a bakery, staring at the carbon copy of a manifest she had completed that afternoon. Train number 7749 was scheduled to depart Warsaw at 6:15 the following morning, bound for a depot 30 kilometers southeast of Smolensk. Its cargo manifest listed 200 winter coats, 400 pairs of insulated boots, 50 crates of preserved meat, and 30 cases of medical supplies. Somewhere on the Eastern Front, German soldiers were counting on these supplies to survive the approaching winter. She picked up her personal typewriter, a worn Olympia that had belonged to her father, and began experimenting. The German logistics system relied entirely on precise documentation. Every train had to present proper manifests at checkpoints along its route. Station masters consulted master routing lists to verify destinations and authorize track usage. If a train's manifest listed a destination that did not match the routing lists, standard protocol required the train to be held at the nearest major depot until the discrepancy could be resolved with headquarters. Margot realized that she possessed intimate knowledge of hundreds of legitimate depot names, routing codes, and bureaucratic procedures. She also knew that the German administration had established dozens of temporary supply depots throughout occupied Poland and Western Russia, many with similar-sounding names. The depot at Konotop was only 60 kilometers from Kaniv. The supply station at Bryansk was easily confused with the rail junction at Bobruisk. The fueling depot at Kursk shared many letters with the maintenance facility at Krusk. The next morning, Margot arrived at work 15 minutes early. She had spent the night studying railway maps and memorizing the locations of legitimate German supply depots throughout occupied territory. Her plan was elegant in its simplicity. She would introduce subtle but systematic errors into the destination codes of selected manifests. The errors would be plausible enough to pass initial inspection, but wrong enough to send trains to locations where no infrastructure existed to receive them. Her first test came with manifest number 4791. The original destination was listed as Bryansk Central Supply Depot, grid reference M43-17. With careful deliberation, Margot changed a single letter, typing Bobruisk Central Supply Depot, grid reference M43-17. Bobruisk was a real location, approximately 200 kilometers northeast of Bryansk, but it contained only a small rail junction with no supply facilities. A train arriving there would find no warehouses, no unloading equipment, and no personnel authorized to accept the cargo. The beauty of her system lay in its subtlety. Each error appeared to be nothing more than a simple typing mistake, the kind that even experienced typists might make when processing dozens of similar-looking destination codes. When Oberführer Brenner conducted his daily inspection, he noticed nothing unusual. The manifest contained all required information, properly formatted and clearly typed. The destination matched his mental database of German supply installations throughout the occupied territories. Train 7749 departed Warsaw precisely on schedule at 6:15 on October 17, 1942. Its locomotive pulled 26 freight cars loaded with winter equipment desperately needed by German forces near Smolensk. The train's conductor carried manifest number 4791, which directed him to proceed to Bobruisk Central Supply Depot. Railroad officials at subsequent checkpoints consulted their routing guides, found Bobruisk listed as a legitimate destination, and cleared the train to continue eastward. 2 days later, locomotive 7749 arrived at Bobruisk Rail Junction to discover a small station master's office, a water tower, and 3 parallel tracks used primarily for sorting freight cars destined for other locations. No supply depot existed. No unloading facilities had been constructed. No personnel had been assigned to receive military cargo. The station master, a nervous man named Dmitry Volkov, who had been conscripted into German railway service, consulted his orders repeatedly, but found no instructions regarding the disposition of 26 freight cars containing winter supplies. Following standard protocol, Volkov telegraphed Warsaw Transportation Headquarters to report the discrepancy. His message reached Oberführer Brenner's office on October 20th, 3 days after the train had departed. Brenner examined the original manifest and immediately noticed the destination error. His initial assumption was that Margot had simply mistyped a single letter, changing Bryansk to Bobruisk. Such mistakes, while regrettable, occurred occasionally even among experienced typists. Brenner issued corrective orders directing train 7749 to proceed from Bobruisk to its intended destination at Bryansk. However, wartime railway schedules operated on precise timing. The unexpected delay had disrupted the carefully orchestrated movement of dozens of other trains throughout the region. Track space at Bryansk had already been allocated to other shipments. The train would have to wait at Bobruisk for 72 hours before track space became available for the final leg of its journey. Those 3 days proved critical. While locomotive 7749 sat motionless at Bobruisk Junction, temperatures throughout western Russia dropped 15 degrees below normal. German units near Smolensk, already operating with minimal winter equipment, began reporting frostbite cases among personnel still wearing summer uniforms. The 200 winter coats and 400 pairs of insulated boots contained in the delayed train represented the difference between operational effectiveness and medical emergency for those soldiers. Margot learned of her success through intercepted German communications that filtered through the Polish resistance network. The news emboldened her to expand her sabotage operation, but she knew she had to proceed with extreme caution. A single typing error might be overlooked as human fallibility, but a pattern of errors would certainly attract investigation. She developed a more sophisticated system, introducing different types of plausible mistakes across various categories of manifests. Some destination errors involved switching similar-sounding depot names, as she had done with Bryansk and Bobruisk. Other errors involved transposing grid reference numbers, sending trains to coordinates where no installations existed. A third category involved subtle changes to routing codes that would direct trains along longer alternate routes, adding days to their journey times. Margot varied her error types randomly and never introduced more than one error per week to maintain the appearance of occasional human mistakes rather than deliberate sabotage. Her second major success came with manifest number 5238, processed on October 24th. The original document directed train 8815 to transport medical supplies and ammunition to a forward depot serving German units southwest of Moscow. Margot changed the grid reference from N39-22 to N39-12, a coordinate that placed the destination 60 kilometers further south in a region controlled by Soviet partisan units. Train 8815 departed Warsaw on October 26th with 18 freight cars containing morphine, surgical instruments, rifle ammunition and artillery shells. The locomotive crew followed Margot's modified manifest, proceeding confidently toward what they believed to be a legitimate German supply depot. 2 days later, they arrived at the designated coordinates to find dense forest and no infrastructure of any kind. Worse, their location placed them within range of Soviet reconnaissance patrols operating throughout the region. The train's commander, Hauptmann Friedrich Müller, was a career railway officer who had supervised military transportation for 12 years before the conflict began. He immediately recognized the dangerous situation and ordered his crew to reverse course toward the nearest German-controlled station. However, the locomotive's fuel reserves had been calculated based on the original route distance. The additional 60-kilometer detour left insufficient fuel for a safe return journey. Müller faced an agonizing choice: abandon the train and its valuable cargo while attempting to reach German lines on foot, or remain with the locomotive and risk capture by Soviet forces. He chose to stay, hoping that German reconnaissance units might locate the stranded train before enemy forces did. For 48 hours, Müller and his crew waited in the forest, burning furniture from the locomotive's crew compartment to stay warm while rationing their emergency food supplies. Soviet partisans discovered the abandoned train on October 30th. Rather than attempt to capture the crew, they simply removed the ammunition and medical supplies, then disabled the locomotive by destroying its main drive components. When German search units finally located train 8815 3 days later, they found it stripped of its cargo and permanently inoperable. The 18 freight cars, each representing thousands of marks in military investment, had become nothing more than rusting monuments to the power of administrative confusion. Back in Warsaw, Oberfuhrer Brenner was beginning to notice a disturbing pattern. 3 major shipping delays had occurred within 2 weeks, each involving apparent transcription errors in destination coordinates or depot names. While individual typing mistakes were understandable, The clustering of errors suggested either declining quality control or deliberate interference. Brenner ordered a comprehensive review of all manifests processed during October, seeking any additional evidence of systematic problems. Margot knew that increased scrutiny was inevitable, but she also understood that her sabotage operation had already achieved remarkable success. 2 major supply trains had been effectively eliminated from German logistics chains, depriving frontline units of critical equipment during the period when winter weather was beginning to affect military operations. Intelligence reports from the Polish underground indicated that German units throughout the Eastern Front were experiencing unusual shortages of winter clothing and medical supplies. She decided to attempt one final, ambitious operation before suspending her activities. On November 2nd, she encountered manifest number 6174, which detailed the largest shipment she had ever processed. Train 9937 was scheduled to transport 42 freight cars containing enough winter uniforms, insulated boots, heating equipment and preserved food to supply an entire division for 3 months. The cargo's estimated value exceeded 2 million marks, representing one of the most significant supply shipments of the entire Eastern campaign. The original destination was listed as Kalinin Forward Supply Complex, grid reference 041-35. Margot knew that Kalinin was a major German logistics hub serving units advancing toward Moscow, heavily defended and equipped with extensive unloading facilities. However, she also knew that the Germans had established temporary supply depots with similar names throughout the occupied territories. The town of Konotop, 300 kilometers south of Kalinin, housed a small depot called Konotop Forward Supply Station. With meticulous care, Margot modified the manifest to read Konotop Forward Supply Complex, grid reference 041-35. The change was subtle but devastating. Konotop's depot was designed to handle local distribution of supplies to nearby units, not the massive cargo capacity of 42 freight cars. More importantly, the route to Konotop would take the train through regions where Soviet forces had recently increased their partisan activities. Train 9937 departed Warsaw on November 4th, representing the largest single supply shipment that Margot had successfully misdirected. Its locomotive struggled to pull 42 heavily loaded freight cars through increasingly difficult terrain as the route led southward toward Konotop rather than northeast toward Kalinin. The train's progress slowed significantly as it navigated secondary rail lines not designed for such heavy loads. On November 6th, approximately 50 kilometers north of Konotop, locomotive 9937 encountered a section of track that had been damaged by recent partisan activity. The sabotage was subtle but effective. Rail spikes had been partially loosened, creating enough instability to derail heavily loaded cars while allowing lighter traffic to pass safely. When the massive supply train attempted to traverse the damaged section, 6 freight cars derailed, blocking the track and stranding the entire shipment in hostile territory. The derailment occurred in a region where German control was tenuous at best. Soviet partisan units operated freely throughout the forest, and the nearest German garrison was more than 40 kilometers away. The train's security detail, consisting of 12 soldiers armed with rifles, was completely inadequate to defend such a valuable target in enemy territory. Within hours of the derailment, partisan scouts had located the stranded train and begun planning an operation to capture its cargo. Hauptmann Wilhelm Krauss, the train's commanding officer, found himself in an impossible situation. His orders required him to protect the shipment at all costs, but his limited personnel made effective defense hopeless against determined partisan attack. He radioed German headquarters requesting immediate reinforcement, but winter weather had grounded most air support, and ground units were engaged in critical operations near Moscow. The partisan assault began before dawn on November 7th. Rather than attempt to capture the train intact, Soviet forces focused on destroying its cargo to prevent German use. They systematically burned the freight cars, containing winter uniforms and food supplies, while removing weapons and medical equipment for their own use. By the time German reinforcements arrived 36 hours later, Train 9937 had been completely destroyed, its cargo scattered across the forest floor, or hauled away by partisan units. The loss represented a catastrophic blow to German supply operations. 42 freight cars worth of winter equipment had been eliminated at the precise moment when falling temperatures made such supplies critical for maintaining troop morale and combat effectiveness. Intelligence reports indicated that German units throughout the Moscow front were beginning to report significant increases in cold weather casualties due to inadequate clothing and heating equipment. Oberfuhrer Brenner's investigation into the mounting transportation failures had identified Margot as the common factor in all three major incidents. Her typing assignments had included all the manifests containing destination errors, and her previously spotless record made the recent cluster of mistakes highly suspicious. On November 9th, Brenner summoned Margot to his office for questioning about the apparent pattern of transcription errors. Margot entered the meeting prepared for arrest and potential execution. She had spent the previous evening destroying any evidence of her sabotage activities, including the railway maps and depot lists she had used to plan her destination changes. Her strategy was simple: maintain complete innocence while attributing any errors to the increasing workload and stress of processing hundreds of manifests each week. Brenner confronted Margot with copies of the 3 erroneous manifests, pointing out the specific destination changes that had caused the transportation failures. He demanded explanations for how such similar errors could occur in such a short time frame, particularly given her reputation for accuracy and attention to detail. His tone was stern but not yet accusatory. He appeared to be seeking evidence of intentional sabotage rather than assuming guilt. Margot's response was carefully crafted to appear confused and defensive rather than guilty. She pointed out that she processed more than 60 manifests each week, often working overtime to meet increased shipping demands. The destination codes for various supply depots were frequently similar, and transcription errors were inevitable when typing at high speed under pressure. She expressed dismay that her mistakes had caused such serious problems and offered to double-check all future manifests to prevent similar incidents. Brenner found himself in a difficult position. While the pattern of errors was suspicious, Margot's explanation was plausible, and he had no direct evidence of intentional sabotage. More importantly, she remained his most efficient and reliable typist, capable of processing more manifests per day than any other employee in the department. Replacing her would significantly reduce the office's productivity at a time when transportation demands were increasing. After 2 hours of questioning, Brenner decided to implement enhanced supervision rather than pursue formal charges. Beginning immediately, all manifests processed by Margot would be reviewed by a secondary checker before being finalized. Any future errors would result in immediate dismissal and referral to security authorities for investigation. The compromise allowed Brenner to maintain his department's efficiency while addressing the apparent quality control problems. Margot accepted the new supervision arrangements with apparent relief, thanking Brenner for his understanding and promising to exercise greater care in future typing assignments. Privately, she understood that her sabotage operation had ended. The secondary review process would make it impossible to introduce destination errors without immediate detection. However, she also realized that her 3 successful operations had achieved remarkable results, eliminating supply shipments worth millions of marks and contributing to equipment shortages that were already affecting German military operations. The broader impact of Margot's sabotage became apparent over the following weeks, as German forces throughout the Eastern Front encountered the harsh realities of winter warfare without adequate equipment. Units that should have received winter uniforms from Train 7749 continued operating in summer clothing as temperatures dropped below freezing. Medical facilities that had expected supplies from Train 8815 faced critical shortages of morphine and surgical instruments precisely when cold weather injuries were increasing. Most significantly, the entire division that should have been equipped with supplies from Train 9937 found itself inadequately prepared for the brutal Russian winter. Intelligence reports intercepted by the Polish resistance indicated that German commanders throughout the Moscow front were struggling with unprecedented logistics problems. Equipment shortages that had been manageable during autumn warfare became critical vulnerabilities as winter weather intensified. Soldiers lacking proper winter clothing experienced rapid deterioration in combat effectiveness, while medical units overwhelmed by cold weather casualties could not provide adequate treatment due to supply shortages. The psychological impact proved equally significant. German soldiers had been assured that their sophisticated logistics system would provide all necessary equipment for winter operations. When critical supplies failed to arrive on schedule, morale declined rapidly as troops realized they were fighting both the Soviet army and the brutal Russian winter without adequate support. Letters intercepted by intelligence services revealed growing resentment toward the administration and increasing doubt about the campaign's ultimate success. Margot continued working in the transportation office until the following spring, processing manifests under constant supervision and maintaining perfect accuracy in all subsequent assignments. The secondary review process prevented any additional sabotage opportunities, but it also validated her explanation that previous errors had resulted from work pressure rather than intentional interference. Brenner gradually relaxed his scrutiny as winter turned to spring without further incidents. By March 1943, the true scope of Margot's achievement had become apparent through resistance intelligence networks. Her 3 successful sabotage operations had eliminated supply trains containing equipment valued at over 5 million marks, contributing directly to German logistics problems that had complicated winter operations throughout the Eastern Front. More importantly, her methods had demonstrated the vulnerability of modern military machines to disruption by individuals with detailed knowledge of administrative procedures. The delayed and destroyed supply shipments represented only the visible portion of Margot's impact. Each misdirected train had created cascading effects throughout the German transportation network, forcing schedule modifications that delayed dozens of additional shipments. The psychological effect on German logistics personnel was equally significant, as administrators throughout occupied territories began questioning the reliability of their documentation systems and implementing additional verification procedures that slowed overall efficiency. Margot's story remained unknown to most of her colleagues until after the conflict ended. She had operated entirely alone without coordination or support from formal resistance organizations. Her sabotage techniques required nothing more than intimate knowledge of German bureaucratic procedures and access to standard office equipment. The elegance of her methods lay in their simplicity. By understanding how large organizations relied on accurate documentation, she had found ways to turn their own efficiency against them. After the German administration withdrew from Warsaw in early 1944, Margot resumed her career as a civilian typist, eventually establishing a small secretarial service that operated successfully throughout the post-war reconstruction period. She rarely discussed her wartime activities, preferring to let others believe she had simply performed routine administrative duties under German occupation. Only in her final years did she share the full story of her sabotage operations with historians studying resistance activities during the occupation. The 3 trains that Margot misdirected represented a tiny fraction of the thousands of supply shipments that supported German operations throughout the Eastern Front. However, their elimination came at precisely the moment when winter weather was transforming logistics challenges into survival crises for frontline units. The winter uniforms, medical supplies, and heating equipment contained in those shipments would have made the difference between operational capability and catastrophic suffering for thousands of soldiers facing the brutal realities of Russian winter warfare. German military historians later identified the winter of 1942 to 1943 as the turning point when supply problems began undermining the Eastern Campaign's momentum. While many factors contributed to these logistics failures, including extended supply lines, partisan activities, and harsh weather, the targeted elimination of critical supply shipments played a significant role in creating equipment shortages at the worst possible time. Every winter coat that failed to reach the front lines, every medical supply that never arrived at field hospitals, represented a small but meaningful contribution to the campaign's ultimate failure. Margot's legacy extends beyond her immediate impact on German supply operations. Her story demonstrates how individual resistance could achieve strategic significance through careful planning and intimate understanding of enemy vulnerabilities. She proved that sophisticated military machines remained dependent on accurate information flow, and that individuals with access to critical administrative processes could disrupt entire operations through seemingly minor interventions. The methods Margot developed influenced resistance operations throughout occupied Europe, as underground networks recognized the potential for administrative sabotage. Typists, clerks, and secretaries throughout German-controlled territories began looking for opportunities to introduce subtle errors into transportation manifests, personnel orders, and supply requisitions. While most such efforts achieved only limited success, the cumulative effect of hundreds of small disruptions contributed meaningfully to German logistics problems throughout the final years of the conflict. Perhaps most remarkably, Margot achieved her greatest success through actions that appeared completely innocent to casual observation. Her typing errors looked like simple mistakes rather than deliberate sabotage, allowing her to continue operating even after suspicion had been aroused. This approach contrasted sharply with more dramatic resistance activities that typically resulted in immediate capture and severe punishment for those involved. The story of the misdirected supply trains also illustrates the vulnerability of complex logistical systems to disruption by individuals who understand their operational details. Modern military forces depend entirely on accurate information flow to coordinate the movement of personnel, equipment, and supplies across vast distances. When that information becomes unreliable, even sophisticated organizations can experience catastrophic failures that cascade throughout their operational networks. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.